Are you confused about online dosha quizzes? Do you get different results from different quizzes? That's not surprising. There's so many clients that come into my office for the first time who say, well, I took this quiz and it said I was Vata. But then I took this quiz and it said I was Vata Kapha. I don't get it. What does that mean? Well, I'm going to hopefully clarify a few things for you today. And I want to talk about the difference between Prakruti, which is your original nature, your original constitution, and Vikruti, which is your current nature or your current imbalance. So these online dosha quizzes can be really helpful to get you started on your Ayurvedic path. They can also lead you in the wrong direction if you're trying to self-treat, possibly even leading you to purchase herbs and spend a whole lot of money on them, or even just eat foods or perform practices that will cause you to make your imbalance or your health challenge actually worse. Yikes, right? So here's the problem with online dosha quizzes. Online quizzes often don't distinguish between your original constitution, your Prakruti, how you came into the world, your unique combination and percentage of the doshas, with your current state or your current imbalance, your Vikruti, what you need to work on to feel better right now. They're not the same thing, although they could be. Everyone has a unique Prakruti or original constitution. And we're always trying to get back to that most balanced Pitta, or that most balanced Kapha, or that most balanced Vata Pitta, or Vata Kapha, right? Depending on what your original constitution is, what your Prakruti is, we want to work on being that most balanced fill in the blank, okay? You can tell what your Prakruti is largely by looking at each individual facial feature, your nose. We even distinguish between your nose size and your nose bridge, your eyes, your lips, your facial shape, etc., your bone structure, your muscle tendency or physique tendency, right? How you build muscle, whether you build muscle easily, your skin thickness, the natural state of your hair, your fingers and your palm shape, your tongue structure, as well as your long-term digestive and psychological tendencies. So while most of these physical features don't really change throughout our lifetime, with some exceptions, our digestive and psychological tendencies can. And that's where things get tricky. So when you're taking these quizzes, it's important to know whether the quiz is asking about how you've been most of your life or what's going on right now. And when one or more of these things has been out of balance for a long time, they can start to look like your Prakruti, your original constitution. Sometimes it's hard to remember a time when, for instance, you weren't anxious, or for instance, you weren't constipated. So those long-term symptoms could be part of your natural constitution. For instance, if you have a lot of Vata in your original constitution, you will have a tendency toward constipation and anxiety probably throughout your life. If you have a lot of Pitta in your original constitution or your Prakruti, you will have a tendency to have loose stool and anger, possibly inflammation. However, any dosha can go out of balance no matter what your original nature is. So, like I said, while your Prakruti and your Vikruti could be the same, right? You might have a lot of Vata in your original nature, and your Vata might be out of balance right now. But you could have a lot of Vata in your constitution or your Prakruti, and maybe your Kapha is out of balance right now. And that's one of the misconceptions on dosha quizzes I really want to focus on today. So many people approach the dosha quiz and answer lots of questions that might make them think they have a lot of Kapha dosha, okay? They answer the questions by saying they're overweight, they have a hard time losing weight, and they have a lot of fatigue and tiredness. And I think that a lot of people can identify with that, right? So while these point to a Kapha imbalance, too much earth, too much water, too much tissue, possibly some heaviness and dullness, in my experience, these symptoms actually arise because of Vata dosha. So when we do too much of anything, too much work, we take on too much multitasking, too much dieting, too much exercising, right? We're doing too much deprivation in our diets, too much intensity in our exercises, then we burn out and we do the opposite, right? We're doing this, which is vata, change, air, right? So when we're doing that, we're causing our vata in ourselves, whether we have a lot of it or a little of it, to increase. And then we end up depleted. If we have a lot of pitta, that fire might go up with the air, and then eventually the fire gets blown out and we end up burnt out. So since our minds reflect our bodies, our minds are left incapable of processing new ideas. We might even have some brain fog at that point. Yet the minds are still often full of anxiety and worry when we try to rest or be still, like when we're trying to go to sleep. And then at the same time, our bodies, because we've been on this sort of roller coaster, this yo-yo, and there's been so much movement at times, then our bodies are trying to ground us because we won't. So we're drawn to comfort and stability, often through food and often through overeating. And so after all the dieting and overexertion and overdoing and multitasking, it's likely that our thyroids and metabolisms are burnt out too. So no wonder we gain weight. The problem with identifying with kapha, instead of the underlying cause of our weight gain or fatigue, which is actually vata, is that you might then take it upon yourself to try to balance out your kapha. And what balances out true kapha imbalance? Movement, heat, sweating, change, shaking it up, fasting, raw foods, lots of spices that dry out the body. Do you see the problem? This is the opposite of what vata needs. Vata needs rest, hydration, routine, nourishing foods, slower movement, etc. So you're going to worsen your imbalance. Just because you've gained weight doesn't necessarily mean you need to treat kapha. In my experience, most people need to address vata. And there's a trick to doing that with diet that you can learn from your friendly neighborhood practitioner. And then I've talked a lot about in talks and tutorials. And, you know, if you start approaching the weight gain from a kapha imbalance standpoint, which these websites will have you do because they're not looking at you individually as a person. This is a quiz, right? It's a quiz for anybody to take. Nobody's analyzing it with actual eyes or looking at you with a practiced or experienced eye and saying, you know what, I actually think we need to approach this from a different angle. And perhaps you'll feel more energized at first if you do some of these things, just like you do when you start out anything new, but then you're going to be depleted again in the end. And you'll probably, unfortunately, gain some more weight in the meantime, right? And spend a lot of money unnecessarily. So it's important that, this is my PSA today, before you decide on a course of action when you have a health challenge or a perceived imbalance that you'd like to use Ayurvedic medicine to work on, that you consult a qualified and trained practitioner to give you an assessment of your Prakruti, your original nature, and your Vikruti, what's out of balance now. And here's a secret, it doesn't matter what your Prakruti is. You're always going to work on your Vikruti. You're always going to work on what's out of balance, right? So it's great to know what your Prakruti is. Yay, I've got a lot of pitta, but chances are you're probably going to need to work on your vata because most of us do. When in doubt, work on vata, but do go to a qualified professional so that they can help you with the nuances of that. You can work on vata and kapha at the same time, and there are tricks for that. You can work on your vata and your pitta at the same time, and there are tricks for that, so that you don't send one out of balance while you're working maybe primarily on the other, or that you keep both in check while you're working on both of them, right? And even if you're working, let's say, on your vata and your pitta at the same time, let's make sure we don't send your kapha out of balance, right? So you want to work with someone pretty closely in the beginning so that you can keep an eye on all of these doshas, right? As you're changing things up, as you're discovering who you are, and sort of assessing and uncovering the layers, quite possibly many layers of your imbalance. You are complicated and we all are. And we all have, many layers to our story and our minds and our bodies. So working closely with someone is so important at first. And it's an investment, but if you bypass seeking out the help of an expert, you'll end up spending more time, more effort, and certainly more money on what could be the exact opposite of what you really need. So let me know if I can help you by scheduling an initial consultation, either in person or virtually. You don't have to be in the Salt Lake City area to work with me. Or if I can point you to another qualified practitioner in your area so that you can work with someone in person, because that is really nice to be able to do. So please let me know if you have any questions in the comments or by direct messaging or emailing me. My email is in my profile. And thank you so much for listening. Sending love and balance to all of you today.